What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. We've got a good one for you guys today. My 5 bold predictions for the 2021 season. Most sites out there, they release their bold predictions and there's no spice to them, right? They'll say that like the 10th best quarterback will finish outside the top 12, the 13th best running back will be a running back 1. None of that here. These takes are not designed to go 5 for 5. I'm not trying to hit on every single one of these takes. Rather, it's a way for me to give you a new perspective maybe on some players you didn't think had a lot of upside, and maybe you weren't thinking that their ceiling was as high as it really is. They are far more likely, these outcomes, to happen than the public assumes, and we should be taking advantage of that in drafts because we want players who can greatly exceed their ADP, not just players who will probably return value but not win you a championship. No, I want players who can just absolutely crush their ADP. That's how you win consistently. This video goes live on either Friday or Saturday. I'm really not 100% sure which day it's going to go up on, but regardless, this is a very, very important weekend for drafts. I have my 3 drafts on Saturday, Sunday, and Tuesday, and I know many of you are in the same boat. So please, please, please make sure you have push notifications on for both myself and Adam Schefter. News can drop while you're in your draft, and you don't want to take someone who's going to miss half the season, right? And don't worry, unlike just like the garbage magazines you might pick up on your way to the draft, our rankings are consistently updated, especially this time of year. So if anything happens, the rankings will continue to update for that. And so make sure you check them out and download them before your draft on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So we will go over my bold takes in a second, but first, have to start things off as usual, the stat of the day. I'm going to assume that this video is going up on Saturday, so I'm going to say the stat of the day for Friday and Saturday. If it's different, I do apologize. But Friday's stat was supposed to be who had the longest run in the NFL last season. The answer, of course, is Ronald Jones. It was that like 97, 98-yard touchdown run he had. And since I'm recording this early, I don't really know who's going to win that, but I'll try and post the winner in the comment section below. Today's stat: 4 quarterbacks had at least 90 rushing yards in a game last season. Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, and who was the 4th? Okay, so let's go for some bold takes. And the first one we're going to do is Jonnu Smith. Haven't talked about him in a while, I think. I'm going to predict that Jonnu Smith will finish as a top 5 tight end this season. This is obviously bold because he's being taken in that like 13 to 16 range. It definitely depends on the site. I want to say Sleeper or NFL has him really, really low. A few sites have him in that like 12 to 13 range, but that's kind of where he's going on average. Over the last 5 seasons, the tight end 5 has finished in points per game with, and this is half PPR, 10.5, 8.9, 10.4, 11.4, and 9.4. So that's an average about 10, 10.1 half PPR points per game. That's what it's going to take to be a top 5 tight end. In order to reach that stat line, let's say through 16 weeks and staying healthy for 17 games, it's going to be tough for really anyone to do this season. You got to assume that like a lot of players are going to miss a game or two. So let's say he plays 16 weeks. Stat line he's going to need to post is maybe 52 for 624 and 12. That'll get it done. 63 receptions for 756 yards and 9 touchdowns. That would do it. And then 74 for 888 and 6 touchdowns. Now, the first one is probably wishful thinking. That's basically the scenario where he's not super involved between the 20s, but as they get into the red zone, he's being featured, scores a lot of touchdowns, so he doesn't need as many receptions, as many yards. Again, that is wishful thinking. Like, that is probably more efficient than Tonyan was last season. It's probably like on par with where he was, but it'd be a very, very efficient season. I would say that's extremely unlikely to happen in this offense. But as we increase those receptions, the touchdowns required comes down to the point where he only needs 4.6 receptions per game to hit the mark if he has 6 touchdowns. And those are really attainable. 6 touchdowns is likely on the low end for what we should expect from him this season. 4.6 receptions, That's not too difficult to do. We haven't heard that much buzz surrounding Jonnu this offseason because, I mean, he has missed some time with the ankle injury, and then all of the news at a Patriots camp has been around Cam Newton, around Mac Jones, but Mac is going to be the starter now, we know, for the entire season. He's looked great so far. He's put together one of the best preseasons we've seen so far from a rookie quarterback. Now, the number one reason that, this would not happen is the volume. This is absolutely a run-first offense, and Myers is by far the top target in the passing game. But there's a very strong chance that Jonnu Smith is second. And I've seen rumors that Jonnu will be featured in the passing game. And the fact that they gave him a $50 million contract with $31.25 million guaranteed, that made him the second highest paid tight end this season, third most guarantees among tight ends, mixed with the fact that, Hunter Henry has missed all of August with a shoulder injury. And I can absolutely see an offense centered around Myers, Smith, and the running game. That could be just like the three pieces, if you include the running game as like a piece. Those could be the three main pieces in this offense. And again, our example only requires him to get 4.6 receptions per game and 6 touchdowns. That's it. That's all it takes to be a top 5 tight end in points per game. Those are easily attainable numbers for a tight end that they clearly want to have a massive role in the offense. And since Mac Jones was only announced as the starter recently, his ADP has stayed low. So he's a tight end 14 on Underdog, 12 on ESPN, 15 on Yahoo, 10 on NFL, 17 on Sleeper. Those are all really, really good values, especially if you miss out on the high end. So what Jonnu allows you to do is still target, those top 3 tight ends, maybe target some tight ends in that 5th, 6th round range. But if you miss, and then maybe you miss on our guy Logan Thomas, you can wait a little bit later, still get a guy that we expect to be really, really good in Jonnu Smith. My next bold prediction is that Javonte Williams will be a top 12 running back this season. This is obviously bold because on no platform is he being taken inside the top 20. I believe maybe 23 is the highest he's being taken. A few sites out there he's being taken outside the top 25. Melvin Gordon is still there, and that's going to be a problem early on. But given how much the Broncos gave up to get Williams and how they've just talked about him this summer, it's very clear that they love him and that the talent is there, right? Like, it might not seem like a lot, but teams value their draft picks very heavily, right? They don't just give draft picks away. So trading away a 4th round pick to only move up 5 spots is a lot. They knew that the Dolphins were going to draft Williams, and they knew, we want this kid because we don't want these running backs that are going after him. And so they made a move, traded a 4th round pick to move up only a few spots to get him. Then we see camp open, and not only are beat reporters saying that he's been dominant, but they're already predicting to start camp that he's going to lead the backfield in touches. They move to the preseason, and they only give him 13 touches in the first 2 weeks. They make him a healthy scratch in week 3 because they'd seen enough in camp in the preseason. They knew who he was. That is very high praise for a rookie. Most rookies get a lot of run at some point in the preseason because teams are still evaluating them, right? So we know that the team loves him. What about the offense, though? That's the number one concern, right? That everyone is going to have with Williams not being a top 12 back is that the offense is fairly mediocre, you could say. I mean, it's really just their quarterback. They don't have fantastic quarterback play. But my argument to that would be that, they have great skill players. They have Judy, Sutton, Fant. That's a really, really nice core. And so defenses aren't going to just focus on the ground game because those are pretty good receivers, tight end that you need to cover, right? And their defense is still elite. So there's a strong possibility that they have favorable game scripts in not 12, 13 games, right? This is not a dominant offense with a great defense. It's not going to be winning every game. But there could be a lot of games where they're competitive, they're playing with a 3-4 point lead, and so they do want to lean on the ground game, especially when they announce that Teddy Bridgewater is the starting quarterback. To me, that just signals we're going to run the ball, we're going to play conservative, we want to win more with our defense. Again, I've done a video about how I don't agree with that, but it's the case this season. That's what they're going for. And I just feel like everything is aligned with Williams this season. Talent, draft capital, opportunity, it is all there. And so I'm predicting he's going to finish as a top 12 running back in points per game this season. My next bold take is that Justin Fields will finish as a top 10 quarterback in overall points. This is probably going to be the boldest take in this video because we know he's not starting week 1, right? He's not going to be out there. And so we're already taking one game away from him. So he's guaranteed not to start week 1. His offensive line is bad, and he's a rookie. So a lot of factors working against him finishing top 10 in overall points. However, I would personally be very, very shocked if he wasn't starting by week 2 or week 3. And when he does, you're going to want him, right? We've been talking for years now about how mobile quarterbacks are a cheat code in fantasy. Kyler outscored Brady by 41 points last season, despite 662 fewer passing yards and 14 fewer passing touchdowns, right? The advantage of rushing yards for quarterbacks and rushing touchdowns because they're worth more is insane, right? A top 10 quarterback last season averaged 28.5 rushing yards per game compared to only 11 rushing yards per game for the quarterbacks 11 through 20. And over the last 5 years, the quarterback 10 has averaged 285 fantasy points across a 16-week season. So if we account for now 17 weeks, he's going to need an average of 18.9 fantasy points per game if he takes over in week 2 and 20.2 fantasy points per game if he takes over in week 3. That's what it's going to take to finish as a top 10 quarterback this season. In the preseason, Fields played in all 3 games, but obviously didn't see full run in any of them because no one does in the preseason. He was a quarterback for 17 drives, which is a little less than a game and a half of action. And he managed to rush for 92 yards, which comes out to over 60 rushing yards per game if he had played in an entire game, right? So if we take the drives he had, we smush it into an average of 1 game, it was over 60 rushing yards per game. So let's bump that down to 45. Let's say he runs for 45 yards per game. Since 2000, 60% of the quarterbacks to average at least 45 rushing yards per game with more than 10 starts have cleared our 20.2 points per game threshold. Fields is going to start early in the season, and if he takes over by week 2 or week 3, and he averages 45 or more rushing yards per game, he can absolutely finish as a top 10 quarterback in overall points, even not starting the season as a starter. And guys, I don't see a scenario where Andy Dalton comes out of the Rams game in week 1, the starter in week 2. I don't see it happening. Fields could take over at halftime, but honestly, I don't see a scenario where Dalton goes out there, dominates, and they're like, yep, we want this in week 2. No, he's going to get absolutely crushed, and we're going to see Fields very early in the season, and you're going to want him. I would now be taking him over Trey Lance. Jonathan Taylor. Let's do a Jonathan Taylor take next up. And my hot take is he's going to lead the league in rushing, which is obviously bold because you've got King Henry, probably. I would say sports betting markets have him at 1. And then Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb absolutely is going to be favored over Jonathan Taylor for the rushing crown. And also because everyone's terrified of the Colts this season. But Taylor was incredible when given volume last year, just like we knew he would be. And now the situation has improved, which is honestly wild to think about because the consensus of the public seems to be that the situation has gotten worse. People are terrified of Carson's foot injury, that he's now on the COVID IR. They're scared of the offensive line with the Nelson injury, with Nelson, I think, being on COVID IR. They're scared of Marlon Mack. But no one was concerned with Noodle Arms Rivers last season? Or the fact that Taylor was a rookie, seeing a very minimal snap share? Because despite those 2 factors, he averaged 117 rushing yards per game over the final 7 weeks. And even during that time when he was crushing it, he was in on over 60% of the snaps twice. Right? He was not featured last season, and he still crushed it. He's reportedly been the best player in camp by a mile, and they refuse to play him in the preseason to keep him healthy because they know how important he is on the offense. And every report indicates that he's going to be the focal point of this offense, and that makes sense, right? You're the head coach, you're the offensive coordinator of the Colts. What are you doing? Are you centering the offense around Carson Wentz, who was a quarterback you brought in this offseason, who's missed a ton of time with a foot injury, has been on COVID IR, just in general, let's just say he's not an elite quarterback, right? So in general, he's not even that fantastic. You only have 2 quality receivers in Campbell and Pittman. You don't really have any great tight ends. Like, what are you? You're obviously going to feature Jonathan Taylor, right? Anyone in their right mind would do that. So I'm expecting we see some huge games, some blowout games for Taylor this season. And I think that's going to be enough for him to finish first in rushing yardage in the entire league. Next bold take. Let's go to wide receiver. Bryan Edwards will finish the season as a top 30 wide receiver, which is obviously bold because he's being taken, I would say on average, outside the top 60. Maybe if you're in a competitive league, maybe if you're on Underdog, he kind of pushes into maybe the 50s. But that's at the earliest, right? Nowhere is he being taken inside the top 30. Now, most people don't realize this, but Edwards was trending towards a large role last season before getting injured, but his injury opened the door for Nelson Agholor to take over that number 1 role. And by the time that Edwards was healthy, he wasn't able to take that job back. But the fact that they were planning on using him as their ex-receiver, as a 21-year-old rookie, and not the first rookie wide receiver that they drafted, is pretty impressive, right? This summer, it's been just insanely obvious that they want him to be the lead receiver, and it's just incredible watching Derek Carr and Gruden talk about this kid. Like, they cannot say enough nice things. They cannot praise him enough. They've praised his work ethic. They've praised how much progress he's made. They've compared him to receivers like Terrell Owens, Devonta Adams. Like, it is so obvious that he's going to be their ex-receiver this season. And it's so obvious when you watch the clips out of camp. You watch people talk about him. They're so excited for him. The talent is there. Everything is there. And when you look at Agholor last season, like, I know everyone knows Aguilar's like not that good, right? Like, no one's debating that he's a great receiver, right? He was still able to get, because there aren't that many weapons on this offense that are like commanding target shares, he was still able to command 82 targets, converted it into like 900 yards, 8 touchdowns, was a wide receiver 29 overall, 39 in points per game. Like, I can promise you that Edwards this season is more talented than Agholor was last season, or that Agholor will ever be. He's going to have a very large red zone role. He's going to have a downfield role. He's going to work close and intermediate. Like, he's not only running deep routes. And given that he really only needs to match what Agholor did last season in terms of volume to just shatter his ADP, I just truly don't understand why he goes so late. Everyone was excited to talk about Edwards last season, given his 100th percentile breakout age, his really nice athleticism, the landing spot. But after one injured season, people are out on him, even though his situation is basically a lock. I mean, he didn't even play in the preseason because, again, when you can find people that are not playing the preseason, healthy scratches, you know they're going to be a part of the offense, right? Teams just know sometimes. They're like, listen, I don't need to see you go out there for 30 snaps in the preseason and risk getting hurt. Like J.K. Dobbins, like a number of players over the years that have played in the preseason when we knew their role was on lock and they get hurt, teams are starting to smarten up. They're not playing their studs in the preseason. And so when we can identify that, it's good for us to do. And then when we're in fantasy, I think the biggest tip for wide receiver late is look for a cheap wide receiver 1. Look for a player who is a wide receiver 1 on their own team, because if things break their way, they have the most upside. We're not looking for like wide receiver 2s that are solidified in that spot, wide receiver 3s solidified in that spot. Why not a 1? Because if Edwards is as good as we think he is, and he's the 1, and he's going later than a bunch of 3s, that doesn't make any sense. So that's why we're all over guys like Edwards, but then also like Pittman and like Jacoby Myers, because they're the number 1 receiver on their team, but they're going extremely late in drafts. And one like last tip, as far as that's concerned, if you can do that and you can like find a wide receiver 1 on an offense that's going late in drafts that also either didn't play in the preseason or didn't play like a ton and make like splash plays and score a touchdown, those are the guys you want because you know for a fact you're getting them cheaper than you should. Like if Edwards went out there and he scored 2 touchdowns in the preseason, looked like the guy, he's going 5 rounds earlier, right? You want to find the guys who didn't get hyped up and don't have elevated ADPs. So those are my bold takes for the 2021 season. If you've got a draft these next 3 days and you want to see my take on every other player, along with my projections, risk grades, targets, avoids, sleepers, and a whole lot more, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.